Everybody, what's good? What's going on? JB here, back with another CyberInsight video. And today I want to welcome you to what is a kickoff of my lab series covering the basics of Azure networking. So if you aren't familiar with Azure, it's one of the more powerful cloud computing platforms. It's run by Microsoft, and what it does is it enables us to build, deploy, and manage different applications and services within a cloud environment. So one of the key components when it comes to Azure is networking capabilities. And what that does is that allows us to create and manage locally isolated networks within the cloud. So the point of today's video is we're going to cover some of the core fundamental concepts of Azure networking. So that's going to include virtual networks and subnets. And as we build this series out, we're going to cover some other things like DNS, virtual host, security concepts like security groups. And then additionally, we'll also cover a lot of the different types of ways that we can connect our virtual environments to other remote environments. So we're going to talk a little bit about Azure VPN gateways, Azure Express routes, and the Azure Virtual WAN. But don't worry about that. We're going to get to those in some later videos. But what I can tell you is by the end of this video, you should have a pretty solid grasp of the basics of Azure networking and be able to start creating and managing your own virtual networks within Azure. So go grab a drink, sit back, we're going to relax, and we're going to jump into this. All right, so here we have what we're going to be building out today. It might look a little overwhelming, but don't worry about it. We're going to cover all the different key concepts behind here. But in essence, what we're going to be building out is 3 different VNets with a bunch of different subnets within them. We're not going to be getting into adding any actual virtual devices or anything like that in here. Right now, we're just worried about building out the framework and architecture to allow us to layer in some other devices and services later on. Now, if you'd like to follow along with this, I'm going to put a link in the video description. So this is the course that you can go ahead and follow along. This is where I'm pulling these labs from. This is the AZ900 Designing and Implementing Microsoft Azure Network Solutions course that Microsoft has. It's free. All you really need to do is go and sign up for a free version of Azure. And you can just follow along and start learning about all the sweet Microsoft Azure networking goodness. What we're actually looking at today is going to be the first exercise within the Introduction to Azure Virtual Networks module that they have, and this is going to be design and implement a virtual network within Azure. Now, before we actually dive into getting into the Azure portal and configuring things, I did want to cover a few topics really high level just so we kind of have a basic understanding of the different components that we're going to be configuring today. So as I mentioned, if you aren't familiar with what a VNet is, it's an Azure Virtual Network. If you've had any experience maybe with AWS, then you're familiar with what a VPC is. A VNet is pretty much Azure's equivalent of a VPC. It's going to be a logical group that you're able to deploy resources within. Each VNet allows you to create a logical grouping of your own resources. You're going to have your own IP subnets, CIDR range that goes within that. They can completely overlap. You can create a whole bunch of different VNets with the same IP space as long as you don't ever want them to communicate with each other. Or if you're going to be connecting it back to your own data center, making sure that there isn't any type of IP conflicts between what you're using in the cloud and what you're using on-premise. So a few of the capabilities that we have within VNets. So communication to the internet is normally something that we're going to see that's going to involve some type of natting that ends up happening. We have communication between Azure resources, so that's both within your VNet and within other VNets. So we're going to go into in later videos how we do different types of connections and peerings to make that happen. We have communication back to your on-premise resources. This is going to be done using VPNs or what they call Express Route, which again, if we're looking back at things that you might be familiar with AWS, that's similar to Direct Connect. So it's just circuits that are done between your physical location or your data center location back to the cloud environment. Something else that we have some security aspects to this. So being able to filter traffic. We do that with a few different things. We can do that with virtual appliances, network security groups, firewalls, things like that. And then obviously we have the ability to route traffic between the subnets, between the virtual networks, back to our on-premise environment, and to other services within the Azure cloud. When it comes to IP space, they prefer you to use RFC 1918 space, so private IP space. And you can use any of these particular ranges here. You should probably be familiar with these. You've seen them other places. There are some ranges that we can't use. And that really ties back into like multicast, broadcast, link local addresses, and then some stuff that's used for their internal DNS. Just like when dealing with AWS, there's specific IP addresses that are already reserved within each subnet. And so we have if we're looking at a /24, we have the first IP address, which is going to be that .0. It's going to be the network address. Then the next IP address after that is going to be the gateway. And then 2 and 3 would then be used for their DNS servers. And then obviously the last IP address within that subnet is going to be the broadcast address. Now, when I said this is dealing with a /24, obviously, if we're looking at something that's different, smaller, for instance, than a /24, then it's just going to be the first 4 IP addresses are unusable, and then the last IP address is unusable. So as I mentioned, things that we want to make sure when we're doing this planning to build out these VNets, we want to make sure that we don't have overlapping IP space. Is there any type of security isolation that needs to happen both within particular subnets from other subnets within our VNet? Is there other types of security protections that need to be done between on-prem and our VNet? Is there security protections that need to be in place between the internet and whatever we put in our VNets? Will we need to have any type of connections back to our data center or on-premise environments? Different types of admin isolation that might be required. And are there any other types of Azure services that we might be using? DNS, storage, other types of application services, things that we're going to be talking about a little bit later in some additional videos. So a few other things they mention here, some subnetting, microsegmentation, how we might want to break up our subnets and protect them in different ways. We can do that with network security groups. We're going to go into those later. Those are pretty much just some stateful ACLs. Naming conventions is always an important thing. Here's another key component that's good to understand is regions and subscriptions. A subscription is really just your account that you create within Azure. And when I say account, I guess I'm kind of using like AWS language there. A subscription is just the overarching account that all the different things that you're going to be creating and responsible for within the Azure environment fall into. There's different regions, just like there is with AWS. And then within those different regions, they have different availability zones. Availability zone in Azure is almost the same thing as availability zone in AWS. What that means is it's just a grouping of data centers that are geographically located in a similar location. You can identify particular resources that you want to go within different availability zones. And here we have an example of just a region that has multiple availability zones within it. It's worth noting that there are different types of Azure services that support availability zones. They fall into different categories. You have zonal services, which are specific to a particular zone. You have zone redundant services, which can move back and forth. And then you have non-regional services, which are just a global service. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was public IP addresses. Very similar to what we would do within AWS, where there are specific things that need to be able to be reached from the internet. So we want to make sure that we do configure them with public IPs. They can be either statically assigned or dynamically assigned. They have a few different SKUs depending upon what you need. I think the basic SKU allows for inbound connections by default. So you might want to be aware that standard SKU is going to block those. These public IPs can be used on a whole bunch of different types of devices. So it's network interfaces, VPN gateways, application gateways, internet-facing load balancers. Pretty much anything that you would need to have a connection to or from the internet. All right, so that kind of covers some basic info. Now we can actually get into what we are here to do, and that is actually start to build out some virtual networks within Azure. So we have this diagram, we have these different regions. Then we're going to have these different subnets that we're going to put in here. Let's take a look real quick at what they are telling us about here. So we have a fictional organization. It's the process of migrating infrastructure and applications to Azure. And as a network engineer, we need to implement 3 virtual networks and subnets to support the resources in these virtual networks. The core services VNet is deployed in in the East US region. The virtual network will have a large number of resources. It will have connectivity to on-prem networks through a VPN connection, so we can see Here, going back over IPsec, the network will have different subnets to support web services, database, and other systems. Shared services such as a domain control and DNS will also be located here. A large amount of growth is anticipated, so a large address space is necessary for this virtual environment. Then we have the manufacturing VNet. This is in West Europe region, and it's dealing with their manufacturing facilities. It says that they're anticipating a large number of internal connected devices to their systems to retrieve data from here. So they'll need IP address space that it can expand into. And the last one's a research VNet in Southeast Asia region. Let's see if there's anything important with here. The research and development team uses this virtual network. The team has a small, stable set of resources and not expected to grow. What we are going to do is we are going to create these virtual networks. We're going to assign these to these regions. We're going to give an overarching IP space and then create subnets out of these particular blocks. So if we look through what our actual steps here are, in order to create any particular resources, we need to create a resource group that we're going to be putting them into. So we're going to do a resource group, and then within that resource group, we're going to create the VNets and then the subnets within those particular VNets. So if we're going to log into the Azure portal, and we can just go and find, under Azure Services, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff up here. Depending upon if you've logged in before or not, they might just put some popular things up here. We're going to go to resource groups. And we're going to go create. Now you can ignore some of those other resource groups that I have there. That's just from some other work of other stuff that I've deployed before. And we have our Azure subscription one. This is the only one that I have here configured. And we are going to create a new resource group. So we're going to CyberInsight. We'll just go lab. Okay. And we can have this resource be in US East. And when we go and hit create, anytime we do this within Azure, it's going to do a validation to make sure everything seems correct. And that looks good, so we can go ahead and hit create. Also worth noting, they do have tags here, just like in AWS. Tags are a great thing, especially when we have different types of resources doing different things. We want to either apply things to different resources that have the same tag, or you want to search for particular resources that are associated with something. So in reality, definitely use tags. It can be pretty helpful. So we're going to hit create. And we see up here that we created this successfully. You're going to see as we go through and do any type of creation, status stuff will be up here in the right-hand corner. So now we're going to go ahead and create the virtual networks. To do that, we're just going to go and type in virtual networks. And then here we're going to select the subscription and the resource group. Then we're going to give it a name, the region it's going in, and the IP address needed. So let's go VNet. Then we can click on that there. We're going to go create virtual network. Azure subscription 1, and then the resource group we're going to be using is the CyberInsight Lab. And then we can just copy over the information here. So this is the core services VNet. It's going to be in US East, and then that's going to be the IP address is a 1020 with a /16. So we're going to have that there, and then we can go ahead and create subnets under this as well. And then we're just going to copy these over. So we have a gateway subnet. This is going to be what we're probably going to be putting any type of VPN device, firewall, things like that. That's why you're going to see it's going to be a /27. It's a bit smaller. A gateway subnet, and that's going to be 20.0/27. 192.168.1.1.6/27. The NAT gateway, we're going to leave these alone. We're not going to do anything with this. And service endpoints, we aren't going to create any endpoints at the moment. We don't need that. And let's create the other 3 that we had here. All right, that looks good. 4 subnets, all within this 10.20.0.0/16. If we wanted to add IPv6 space, we could go ahead and we could select that there. We're not going to do that at the moment. NAT gateway is recommended for outbound internet access from the subnets. We can actually go ahead and add those later. We don't need to do that at this point. See if there was anything else that we wanted to do here. I think we can go ahead and just I'll just show you this. Some other options, security options. If we had a bastion host added in to any of these, we could do that. DDoS protection standard. I believe that there's 2 different options for DDoS protection. The basic one is enabled by default and protects all of Azure. This one, if you enable this, and you can actually get like specific configurations and alerting that comes with that. And we'll actually go into a different lab on this later, and same thing with the firewall. We aren't going to deploy that at the moment. So let's just go ahead, review and create. And our validation passed. We can see deployment in progress up here. We can see that this VNet has been created. And we'll kind of just let this run through. Deployment is done. Let's see. If we go to this resource, we can see it here. Activity log. We'll show you some things going in there. Address space. We can see the overall subnet. Then we have the other subnets that we created within there. And then if we had enabled any of these other things, the bastion host, DDoS, firewall, all that type of stuff. Let's see anything in here. DNS servers, those are going to be those ones that are already defined within the subnets. And these other things we're going to get into a little bit later. So let's go create the other 2 VNets. And let's see, we're just going to go create. It's going to be the same process. So pretty straightforward. We do want to make sure that we are going to use the correct region. So it's going to be Europe, West Europe. And we'll go manufacturing VNet. Now we can go back to the VNets. And we can see that we successfully created 3 VNets. And if we go into those like we did before, we can see all the subnets that went along with those. And I think that was about it that we needed to do. We verified the subnets. And so, yeah, so that's it. That is your first Azure Networking Lab. Pretty awesome, pretty straightforward. We figured out some of the requirements from the customer. We ended up architecting what the subnets were that we needed, gave us enough room for growth. We used private IP space. took into account the IP subnets that was back on-prem to make sure we didn't have any overlap. Then we built out the VNets and then added in the subnets for each of those VNets as required. So pretty awesome. I hope this was helpful and beneficial. Appreciate you checking it out. Make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, follow along. We have a whole bunch more labs that we're going to be diving into and building on top of these Azure networking concepts. So, all right, take care, and I'll see you later. Bye.